Welcome back, welcome back. Ethiopia, a country that many outside Africa still associate with the desperate famine of the 1980s. But now the country also plays a leading role in African affairs. It's the home to the African Union. It sent troops into neighboring Somalia to keep out the Islamists, and this month represented Africa at the G20 summit in London. I met Prime Minister Zenawi in London and started by asking him if he thought that Africa was going to be the most vulnerable continent during this economic crisis. Prime Minister, the IMF recently said that 15 of the 21 countries that are going to be hardest hit or most vulnerable to what's happening in the crunch crisis are in Africa, 15 out of 21. Do you think that's likely to be the case? Is it inevitable that Africa will be the main sufferer?
It is likely to be the case unless something is done to prevent it. And I think the point that needs to be made is when we face the crunch in Africa, it's not just that people are unemployed, it's that people could die from hunger. And it's things such as the vulnerable peace we have, fragile peace we have in Liberia or Southern Sudan, being jeopardized as a result of this crisis.
And in fact, you said on one occasion that Africa could go under or could be plunged into the conflicts of the past between the various countries unless something's done.
Yeah, the thing is, over the past few years, things had begun to look up, positive developments in the continent, and now those hopes have been dashed by the crisis. And that could reignite conflicts across the continent.
Is there any danger that as a result of this crisis there could be famine like there was famine in 1984?
Well, the famine of 1984 was precipitated by drought in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa in general. The famine that could emerge as a result of this crisis is likely to be silent across the continent in terms of not swaths of territory that are drought affected, but people suffering hunger quietly across the continent. That's the most likely scenario as I see it.
Who do you blame for this crisis? Or President Obama said, well, we shouldn't play the blame game. He said, you know, but we're all responsible. But I mean, who do you blame? Do you blame one country or one part of the world particularly for this economic crisis?
Well, there I think a lot of blame to go around. Even Africa needs to share in the blame because it has not prepared itself for such an eventuality. And so there is a lot of blame to go around. But I think the developed countries were the origin of this crisis, and they have the resources to help everyone overcome this crisis. And I think it's incumbent upon them to help.
A couple of years ago, in an interview with Time magazine, you said about Ethiopia's invasion of neighboring Somalia that it was a tremendous success, you said. Looking back now, when you have a situation where thousands have fled their homes, it's been declared a failed state, Somalia, there's even concern that that more extreme group, the Shabab, is getting in the ascendancy and so on. Looking back now, do you still think your invasion of Somalia was a success, or it should have gone further?
Well, my definition of success then was primarily in terms of preventing a jihad that the extremists in Somalia had declared on Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa in general. We had stopped that. So to that extent, it's been successful. But at the moment, I can say that it's been even more successful than I thought then, because among other things, the political reach of the Shabab is no longer as widespread as it was when we intervened. There is a split now amongst the Islamists. The moderate Islamists have rejected the jihadist elements and have joined the peace process. Indeed, the leader of these groups has now become the president of Somalia. Large swaths of Somalia have resisted and removed forcefully Shabab elements. So I think the political movement is in the direction of further marginalization of the Shabab rather than the influence of the expansion of its influence.
Are there any circumstances, Prime Minister, in which you could foresee that your troops would go back into Somalia if something happened?
Well, I think we have done what we needed to do, and there is no possibility of us going back again.
Definitely not going back.
No.
And I mean, now there were quotes the other day that among the quotes of the new president of Somalia that you just mentioned, Sharif Ahmed, that he was previously chairman of the Council of Islamic Courts as well, that you forced out. And he was quoted as saying in the past that Ethiopia is the hated enemy and an expansionist and racist regime. Do you think you're going to be able to work with this man?
We have already begun to work with this man. He visited us in Addis recently. We agreed that we should help each other out. That may have been his opinion in the past. I'm told that that is not his opinion now.
Next year, of course, is Ethiopia's elections, and you have hinted that you may stand down, you may not continue. You've done 15 years, you'll have done 15 years. Are you going to run in the next elections next year?
As you know, our elections are parliamentary elections. You don't run for prime ministership, you run for a seat in parliament. And the party decides who becomes a prime minister by electing its leader. So it will be up to our party to decide whether they will find someone to replace me as a prime minister or not.
But from your point of view, you're not going to withdraw. You're going to be available again. You're going to run again, and you would accept a fourth term as prime minister?
My preference is that there should be somebody else to replace me.
You prefer that?
Yeah.
So that you're not definitely giving up, but you think that is your preference?
That is my preference, and I hope that that will be the preference of the party too.
What would be your ambition in terms of what would you like to achieve if you step down, before you step down, in the remaining time you have in this period in power? I mean, what would be your ambition? Would it be a settlement of the border dispute with Eritrea, for instance? Or is that not possible?
My main concerns would be with sustaining the fast growth we have achieved over the past 5-6 years, further consolidation of our reforms, political reforms in the country, and yes, if we could get a settlement of the problem with Eritrea, that would be icing on the cake.
Icing on the cake. Not likely, but icing on the cake. As you look back over your period in office, you've been frank about the fact that maybe in 2005 the police and the security forces overreacted after the election there, and the number of people that were killed by from various, some say 193 down to 46 and so on, but that was an overreaction. Is that a mistake, or are there other mistakes that you would do differently if you were doing it again?
I think only angels would say they never make mistakes. And I'm sure there are many mistakes that I have made over the years. All I can say now is that whatever mistakes I made was not for lack of goodwill, but for lack of capacity.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Earlier this month, Barack Obama made his first visit to the Muslim world as President of America. The destination was Turkey, and the message was simple: America is not at war with Islam. But Turkey, Obama's chosen platform for this visit, is an unusual example, of course. It's a secular state with a Muslim majority. Could that become representative? Can Islam and Islamic civilization flourish alongside Western values of democracy and human rights? It's a question posed in The Crisis of Islamic Civilization, written by the former Iraqi cabinet minister Ali Alawi, who joins me now. Ali, welcome.
Thank you, Mr.
The crisis of Islamic civilization, not the Islamic faith, though, is it?
No, I mean, Islam as a faith, as worshipful practice of millions, billions of people, is really appears to be in extremely good shape, and I don't think it's in any form of crisis. It's the outer expressions of Islam in the form of its institutions, organization, laws, the economic relationships that govern societies. All these, though, are in retreat, but the religious aspect of the faith is intact, and I dare say the political manifestations of it, especially in the form of political Islam or Islamism, is in crisis, yes.
And one does get the impression that almost it's a battle for survival between Islamic civilization and modernity. I mean, Islam appears to people to be not implacably opposed to modernity, but extremely suspicious of it.
Well, it's been not at war, it's been in conflict with modernity since, I suppose, the early 19th century, since the expansion of the imperial West into Muslim lands, and then that was the first wave, physical occupation and conquest and destruction, as it were, of the Islamic political space. The second wave was modernization, and we're now passing through a third wave, which is globalization. At each point of these various crises, Islam has been in conflict with the prevailing worldview. It's not so much a crisis in the form of a conflict, a clash of arms, but it is a different worldview. And that worldview, in my mind, has been thwarted from expressing itself in the outer world and expressing an alternative form of organizing Muslims' outer lives that is not at war with modernity, but different from modernity.
Different from?
Different, yes.
Different in what key way?
Well, the roots, I mean, if you look at the roots of modernity, I mean, they lie to a large extent in the Western experience. If you want to look at it in civilizational terms, in the Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman background to Western civilization. Now, Islam has had a different historical trajectory, and it might aim at achieving the same or similar types of outcomes, but not necessarily through the same intellectual perspective or through the same institutional and legal forms that